Senator Elizabeth Warren is, of course, running as a Democrat in the primaries, and she's really differentiated herself from other candidates by putting out a steady stream of specific policy proposals. And what she's proposing now is a way in which the majority of the student debt that the country is grappling with would be canceled. So let me give you the details. She's proposing $1.25 trillion plan, a $1.25 trillion plan to reshape higher education by canceling most student loan debt and eliminating tuition at every public college. Now, how can she do this? Well, first, you have to understand the context of student loan debt. The majority of student loan debt is actually held by the federal government. So the federal government can do something to cancel it, and we can also change the way our taxes work in order to pay for it. So she would expand federal grants to help students with non-tuition expenses and create a $50 billion fund to support historically Black colleges and universities. She would also eliminate up to $50,000 in student loan debt for every person with a household income of less than $100,000. Borrowers who make between $100,000 and $250,000 would have a portion of their debt forgiven. And we do have a video of Senator Warren talking about this in more detail, but before we go to that, Cenk.
Just want to clarify on that. First of all, I'm going to get back to this in a second. I love this plan, and I love how many bold, terrific progressive plans Elizabeth Warren's put out. Okay, now the clarification is, so 95% of the people who have loans will get some loan forgiveness. 75% of the people who have loans will have their loans completely wiped out. Now, the only people that are not at all affected is if your income is above $250,000, okay? Because it's a graduated scale. So, and that's okay. If your income's over $250,000, you have done well with your education, et cetera. It kind of, in a sense, you could argue it worked the way that it was supposed to. It increased your wages, and now you could pay it off. But for a lot of people, it did not work the way that it was supposed to. It did not increase your wages. Instead, the companies benefited from your hard work and your education, but they didn't pay for it. And that's a great point that Elizabeth Warren makes that almost no one else does. And I want to come back to that as well. But first, let's watch Senator Warren talk about it.
Anyone who's got outstanding student loan debt can have up to $50,000 worth of student loan debt canceled out so long as their income is under $100,000, then it kind of steps in up to there's no help for anybody whose family income is above $250,000. And that's it.
Yeah, so look, I also want to give credit to the people who started this idea. And so a person who gets almost no credit, in fact, a lot of disdain from the mainstream media, is Jill Stein, who's the head of the Green Party. She pushed for it back in 2016, Bernie didn't, she did. And I've told the story many times, I kind of scoffed at it when I interviewed her here at the studio and I was skeptical of it. But it turns out Trump came in and gave away $2 trillion to the rich. And if we could afford that, we could definitely afford this. And now a lot of people have picked up the ball. Wayne Messam is also running for president. He is the mayor of Miramar, Florida. He was also in here. He was pushing a very similar idea and was very bold with it, and you should check him out. But this is incredibly detailed, really well thought out. It's $1.25 trillion, easily paid for by the taxes that she has proposed. And by the way, you're gonna love the taxes that she proposed. I know that sounds like a funny sentence, but it's absolutely true. This program is not only brilliant in its policy impact, and we'll talk more about that in a second as well, but it's also great politics.
Right, and it's also very comprehensive in that it doesn't specifically focus on tuition, it also focuses on other costs that are associated with going to college. So all of the emphasis that we hear from politicians is tuition, 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 which is important. That is the bulk of the cost if you're going to a university or a college, but there's also, the fees that are associated, and those fees can get very expensive as well, and she's focusing on ways to alleviate some of that burden as well. Now, how would this be paid for? She would pay for it through revenue generated by her proposed increase in taxes for America's most wealthy families and corporations, which the campaign estimates to be $2.75 trillion over 10 years. Now, Warren's policy would also prohibit colleges from considering citizenship status and criminal history in admission decisions, cut off federal money from for-profit colleges, which I absolutely love, and require an annual equity audit for public colleges that would identify shortfalls in enrollment and completion rates for lower income students and students of color. So again, this is a very comprehensive plan, and I think the issue that will stand in the way is the fact that the federal government, through these loans, has been making money off these students. It's a form of regressive taxation. They give out these loans and they initially charge pretty low interest rates, but the interest rates for these federal student loans have been going up, consistently. And so it becomes more expensive to borrow, and the federal government gets to make money off these students who have no choice but to take out these giant loans just so they can get an education.
Yeah, I have so much more to say. So first of all, on how to pay for it, she has what Anna referred to there, the ultra millionaire tax. So what is it, and why would you like it? Because it only affects 75,000 families, and that's the very, very top of the income brackets and the wealth brackets in this country. And now you say, oh, well, look, guys, what are you gonna just take all the money of the rich? No, it's just 2%. 2% annual tax on people that have more than $50 million in wealth. 50 million. Do you have $50 million? I don't think so, right? Only 75,000 families in this country do. But they're not taking everything, they're just taking 2%, okay? Now, is it fair for people who have accumulated more than $50 million in wealth, because they got to live the American dream, to help other families also have a shot at living the American dream? I think we're gonna get a resounding hell yes that echoes all throughout the country. So, very easy way to pay for it. It actually way more than pays for it because it costs 1.25 trillion and the tax raise is 2.75 trillion. So now the second part of it is when Republicans need money for tax cuts for the rich and corporations, they never tell you how they're gonna pay for it. They do this thing called magic where they go, well, magically the economy is going to improve because of all the tax cuts I gave to the rich. And so the improvement in the economy will be so great that we'll get more revenue to the federal government. It never happens. It never happens. It's a total lie and an excuse to give more money to the rich, okay? But in this proposal, if you actually lifted all of the over $1 trillion in debt from the American people, you know what would happen? It would immediately and massively stimulate the economy because people would then have more money to spend and they just put it into buying cars, buying houses. It would also stimulate that market, right? And starting new businesses, and on it goes. Because wealth at the top is saved, that's a positive way of putting it. Hoarded is another way of putting it, right? But either way, it does not go back into the economy. Whereas if you have wealth that it goes to the middle class, people who got a college education, and all of that is going towards paying off their student debt, they would now be free to spend that on other things that they need. And that would greatly help the economy, which would then pay for the plan even without the ultra millionaire tax.
Right, I love that you brought that up because some people keep referring to it as a philosophy. It's not a philosophy, it's fact. One of the things that's really dragging the economy down and will continue to do so as student loan debt becomes more and more of a burden is that the middle class and these college educated people who have this debt aren't able to go out there and spend, right? So then you hear from some of the other Democratic candidates who are more centrist on issues like student loan debt. Pete Buttigieg, for instance, said, I don't really see the value in having people who don't have a college education subsidizing people who do get a college education, and those people usually make more money. Well, that's a very narrow way of looking at it, right? First of all, if you make college affordable or free at public institutions, it's more likely that people wouldn't be deterred from getting a higher education. But also, even if you have no interest in going to college, it's not about subsidizing people, it's about having a better economy, making sure that people aren't drowning in debt so the broader economy benefits. But also, don't you want to live in a country that has innovation? Don't you want to live in a country where people can get a higher education should they choose to? And if they do get an education, who knows what type of great innovation will come from these people who have that education?
Yeah, Buttigieg just said a couple of concerning things recently, and this is among them. It's a right-wing talking point, and it's total nonsense. What it does is it provides opportunity, okay, a fair chance. Look, no one knows this better than my family, and in this case, it happened to be in Turkey, not in America, in the 1960s. But my dad was a farmer down in southeastern Turkey, no money at all, dirt poor, and he got a chance at a free college education, and it changed his life, it changed all of our lives. So without that opportunity, you got nothing, which leads me to what Elizabeth Warren said about this, and then the facts that back it up. She said, the enormous student debt burden weighing down our economy isn't the result of laziness or irresponsibility. It's the result of a government that has consistently put the interest of the wealthy and well-connected over the interest of working class families. So think about that for a second. She explains, when she was going to college at the University of Houston, it's a good school, you know what her tuition was for a semester? $50. $50. You know what her dad did? I mean, Elizabeth Warren, now she's a US Senator running for president, was a Harvard law professor. Obviously, her dad was some private equity guy, venture capital guy, because that's how it is today, right? No, her dad was a janitor. See, back then, everybody had a shot at the American dream. Now they took that away from us. And how did they take it away? She explains that as well in her Medium post. And so what they did was, in the old days, college education was seen in a lot of ways as similar to high school, junior high, and elementary. It was supposed to be public so that everybody had a shot, right? And it was, that's why this tuition was $50 at the University of Houston. Well, eventually they started to basically privatize. And so they lowered the funding from at the state level, the federal level, the local level. And so they started putting that money, instead of coming from the government, putting it on to the kids and the students. And they get the debt piled on. So what did they do with the money instead? They cut taxes on the rich and corporations. So it was a massive redistribution of wealth from the students. They're the ones who shoulder the burden, carrying the rich and multinational corporations in this country. Madness. It makes no sense at all. And so Elizabeth Warren is saying, well, time to end that madness. Time to actually represent the American people instead, and stimulate the economy at the same time. Now it's a giant win-win, but the wins don't stop. Now let's talk about how this disproportionately affects minorities in this country. So African Americans, 50% of the for-profit colleges enrollment is minorities, which is astounding given the overall percentages in the country. And so they're loaded up with more debt overall, and they have less money to pay for it. So it's a double whammy on minorities, particularly black students. Now, do you know what the wealth disparity in this country is for blacks and whites? This is amazing. You know how wealth works, right? And especially if you're a capitalist, you know how it works, right? It accumulates over time. So if you started with something a long time ago, hundreds of years ago, your family did, well, it has accumulated and accumulated. If you started at zero fairly recently, it hasn't had a chance to accumulate very much. So obviously, African Americans in this country went through slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights movement was only about 50 years ago, right? So get a load of this. For every $100 in white family wealth, black families hold just $5.04.
Jeez.
But education is the great equalizer. But right now, it doesn't equalize. What it does is it loads up black families with a ton of debt. And a lot of times you can't even finish college because you're so overloaded with debt. And then you got the debt and no college degree. Triple whammy.
Yeah, can I jump in on that? And what makes the situation even worse, what exacerbates the disparity is the fact that some of these for-profit colleges specifically target minorities. They specifically try to recruit members of the black community into their schools. And if you have seen any of our previous content on these for-profit colleges, they oftentimes are unaccredited. Even if they are accredited, they inflate their job placement numbers, and they're incredibly deceitful and commit fraud when it comes to recruiting some of these students. And they encourage them to take out the loans, take out the loans, take out the loans. And so, again, this exacerbates the problem, especially when it comes to student loan debt. It's just the system is designed right now to continue this disparity.
So I'm gonna add one last thing here. I think this is such a terrific proposal, and she's done so many great proposals. And normally we do this at the end of interviews, no matter whether we like the candidate, don't like the candidate. We want you guys to have an opportunity to make a difference. But I'm gonna do it at the end of this story because part of what drove me to it was the New York Times snidely adding in their article, but she hasn't done that well in fundraising. Yeah, that's because she's not going to the rich and saying, I'll serve you in every way. In fact, once she said, that's it, I'm not taking any, not only am I not taking corporate PAC money, which she'd said a while back, but she came on this show and said, you know what, I'm not dialing for dollars anymore. I'm not gonna call rich people all day long and ask them for money. And look at these stunningly great proposals, not just since, but certainly that has helped, right? You've got universal child care, expanding affordable housing, elimination of electoral college, but mainly focusing on the families and the average Americans, and now getting rid of student loan debt and the great proposals on taxes, and I can go on and on. So, since she's relying on small donors, ElizabethWarren.com, ElizabethWarren.com/join-us if you want to volunteer. Volunteers make a big difference, and ElizabethWarren.com/donate. Prove the New York Times wrong, prove the skeptics and the critics wrong. The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.